There's an agenda, folks. There's an agenda to force vaccinate you. They're gunning for any product that could actually take away the need for a vaccination. Remember, the CDC has already told you the death rate of COVID-19 now appears to be 0.26%, a quarter of 1%. Why were anyone still locked down? God only knows. Why we're wearing masks? God only knows. But even more importantly, why are we still searching for a vaccine unicorn? You know, I've talked about this before. We know that they want the vaccine unicorn, but now it has what? Even greater potential? Are we developing Operation Warp Speed? Is this vaccine unicorn now gaining superpowers of warp speed? Well, it does appear that it is, and it's scaring the hell out of a lot of people, including vaccine scientists and proponents. Take a look at this little expose on CNN. It gives you a pretty good feel of where Sanjay Gupta and Dr. Peter Hotez are at.
I have very recently seen early data from a clinical trial with a coronavirus vaccine. And these data made me feel even more confident that we will be able to deliver a few 100 million doses of vaccine by the end of 2020.
We will deliver, by the end of this year, a vaccine at scale to treat the American people and our partners abroad.
We're working for a fully approved vaccine, but we'll also use the tools we have, for instance, emergency use authorization as appropriate. We use all of our regulatory tools to bring vaccine available for the entire American population by January.
This doesn't fit with any timeline that we've ever heard before with regard to vaccines. Typically you're talking about many years, not many months with something like this. You clearly are hearing from some very impressive individuals who have a long history of vaccine development. Moncef Slaoui, who has been at a company that was responsible for making 10 vaccines. The timeline on these vaccines, though, several years typically from actual development all the way through FDA approval. So the idea now that we're talking by the end of the year, a possibly fully approved vaccine, not just one that has an emergency use authorization that's for healthcare workers, but a fully approved vaccine. That is the fastest timeline that we have heard, period, in this discussion.
The problem is, it's to be able to test that the vaccine is both safe and effective. And as far as I understand, phase 3 clinical trials on the first vaccine, the Moderna one, won't even begin till the end of the summer. I don't see a path by which any vaccine is licensed, whether it's emergency use or otherwise, until the third quarter of 2021. So I understand that it could be manufactured several vaccines could be manufactured by the end of the year. I just don't see how you collect enough safety and efficacy data to say that we can have a vaccine for general use by the end of the year.
Amen, Dr. Peter Hotez. Now, by the way, he would know he has been working on a coronavirus vaccine for, I think, over a decade now. So he's well aware of all the problems. I'm not going to get deeply into the problems of the vaccine, other than the fact that it killed animals in the animal trial, was totally made all of them sick. And there were warnings at the end of every animal trial saying we better not move, or we should really be careful about moving forward with human trials with this vaccine. Something's terribly wrong. It's making people more sick, or making the animals more sick. Cytokine storms, all of this. Folks, when scientists that usually promote bad vaccine safety science, as we pointed out for years here, when they usually promote it, and now they are terrified of the vaccine in the pipeline and how quickly it's coming, and they start telling you they are worried about the amount of science and the length of the safety testing, you better get really afraid, okay? Because we have very strange bedfellows now, and it doesn't end with Dr. Sanjay Gupta or Dr. Peter Hotez. There was an opinion piece written in the New York Times by our own Dr. Paul Offit and Ezekiel J. Emanuel. Could Trump turn a vaccine into a campaign stunt? In a desperate search for a boost, he could release a coronavirus vaccine that has not been shown to be safe and effective as an October surprise. Interesting point. Let's look at this article. He goes on to say, and this is really worth the read, you should check it out, because there's just, it's one of those articles I wish I could just read the whole thing, but I'm just going to give you a taste of it. Take a listen to this. In a desperate search for political boost, he could release, meaning Trump, a coronavirus vaccine before it had been thoroughly tested and shown to be safe and effective. He goes on to say, no vaccine since the 1950s has been approved and licensed without completing large, prospective, placebo-controlled studies of safety and effectiveness. I am going to take some issues with that statement in just a moment. Let's go on and look at, even if a vaccine generates antibodies, and this is very important, it does not prove that the vaccine is effective at preventing infection. It only makes it more likely that the vaccine would be effective. And let's be clear, let me be really clear talking about those ferret studies that everyone went through. The ferrets did create lots of antibodies. Only problem is once the ferrets went into a challenge study, which we can't do with human beings, where we sprayed or put them in contact with coronavirus, the antibodies actually worked against them. It didn't protect them. It sent their body into a cytokine storm, massive upper respiratory illness and organ failure. It was a total disaster. So there are times when the antibodies actually don't work for you, and there's no way of knowing. They don't seem to know. Peter Hotez says, we don't know why this antibody immune enhancement, a really pretty name for this thing can kill you, is happening. But anyway, let's go on. Paul Offit goes on to say, if only 20,000 participants receive the vaccine, serious but rare side effects might be missed. So he's even saying that 20,000 wouldn't be enough. If some harms are eventually arise, it could further erode a fragile vaccine confidence and threaten the ability to get enough people vaccinated to establish herd immunity. That would be a disaster. And he goes on, let me go ahead and finish it up, and we'll get to the other points. As the White House did with its relentless promotion of hydroxychloroquine, he's on that boat, as a cure, it would badger the FDA to permit use of the vaccine. More pressure would come from drug companies, some of whom may spend up to $1 billion on research and are intensely competing for prestige and glory. They are planning to begin manufacturing their vaccine candidates at risk. That is, before completed studies showing their vaccine is actually effective. Whoa, whoa. Man, first of all, I want to thank you to the team, Dr. Offit. It's nice to have you on board. But are you telling me that you are nervous that the pharmaceutical industries itself, the drug companies that are making the vaccines, shouldn't be trusted to be looking out for our best interest? Are you telling me that they may rush these trials if the president lets them get away with it? Because I was pretty sure your entire career you've been telling us you got to trust the drug companies. I work for them all the time. They're great. Nobody's trying to get people killed. Everybody's only making products and putting them out there with the highest level of safety studies that are known to man. And the drug companies, because, by the way, CDC never does the safety study. The FDA doesn't do the safety study. The drug companies do. And now, all of a sudden, even though I see Paul Offit trying to blame this on President Trump, it does appear your real concern is your buddies, isn't it, Paul? You're really nervous that those people you usually work for, those blood-sucking liars that will push anything through to make a couple billion or $100 billion, that they might actually skip some very important necessary testing for a product that they can never be sued for? Huh. Really interesting. Listen to what he said on CNN. It gets even better.
Yeah, these are extraordinarily preliminary data. So what we're waiting for is we're waiting for the big trial, which is to say the large prospective placebo-controlled trial where you have 20,000 people who get a vaccine, 10,000 people who get a placebo. Then and only then will you know whether a vaccine is safe and effective. We need to do the kinds of trials that prove to us that something's effective and prove to us that it's safe. What worries me in this is we're so desperate for a vaccine because we're terrified, paralyzed by this virus, that we might be willing to accept something less. And I think we owe it to the people in this country, especially remembering that most people who get this vaccine will be healthy young people who would be unlikely to die from this virus. We owe it to them to do the kinds of trials that we normally do to make sure that this is safe and effective.
You know, I'm so torn right now. On one hand, I really want to thank you, Dr. Offit, for saying the exact words I've been saying from stages all over the world, and so has Robert Kennedy Jr. It's really nice to hear you admitting what you've been fighting us on all this time, but you're not actually accurate. And I struggle with this because on one hand, it's really nice that you're saying things like, We really need to wait for that robust study of 20,000 people and 10,000 that receive a saline placebo, because that's the only way, as you put it, the only way we can know that it's safe. By God, you are right. But to say that since the 1950s we have always done that with every vaccine, that's where you start getting off. And remember, even in your article, you said that 20,000 in a study, you could still miss real issues with the vaccine. So it's not even a huge study in your mind. So you're saying, though, that 20,000 and 10,000 in the saline group is the only way we can know. And by the way, why do we need to know? Because children are unlikely to get sick at all. Kind of like the rotavirus, don't you think, the vaccine you made, Dr. Offit? I mean, we know in the United States of America, a child may get diarrhea, but they don't die. I'm not going to go ahead and go against rotavirus maybe in third world countries that have dysentery, but the death rate is really low. Why risk anything with children? Really great point. But to really bang this home, since this is my ballpark, now you've stepped onto my field, where we've been investigating, for those of you who don't know, for the last 4 years, one word, safety, with my nonprofit, the Informed Consent Action Network. And what we discovered is that not a single childhood vaccine, not one of the 16 vaccines given to our children, has ever been through that study that Paul Offit just described. 20,000 people given the vaccine, 10,000 given a saline placebo. The only way we can establish safety, look at this. When we looked at it, there it is. Not a single one of those vaccines. They tested against each other or multiple groups of vaccines or other toxic chemicals that are in the vaccines, but not one ever tested against an inert placebo. And let me point that out. Let me just give you an example. This is right out of the insert, Dr. Paul Offit, of one of those vaccines you said you think was tested thoroughly. Let's look at this. This is Engerex-B, right from the insert itself. It says, all subjects, the clinical trials, a total of 13,495 doses were administered to 5,071 healthy adults and children. So 5,000, not 20,000, 5,000 people got it. All subjects were monitored for 4 days post-administration. That doesn't seem very thorough. And then when you look at, oh, and by the way, there's no placebo group. There's no placebo group anywhere in here. They didn't give you a saline group. Not only was it not 20,000, but 5,000. They didn't have the 10,000 in the placebo group that Paul Offit just said every vaccine goes through. Let's look at the other hepatitis B vaccine, Recombavax. Again, you can find this written right in the paperwork of the vaccine itself. In 3 clinical studies, 434 doses were administered to 147 healthy infants and children up to 10 years old. 147? That seems like a far cry from 20,000 to me. Again, 0 placebo group, Paul. And they were monitored for 5 whole days. Oh, my God. You got Peter Hotez saying, I don't see how when they start a trial at the end of this summer, he said, remember, he said, as my understanding, Moderna isn't going to start a trial until the end of this summer. I don't see how then they'll be able to have a vaccine ready to go by January, because we shouldn't really even understand the results of those trials until, he said, the 3rd quarter of 2021. So even Dr. Peter Hotez seems to think a trial should last at least a year. I would say a lot more, since every drug we take is like 5 to 10 years in a trial. But these scientists are upset with the fact that, well, we're not even going to look at it for a year, which wouldn't be long enough. And I'm showing you vaccines they're pointing to as the gold standard. 5 days? 4 days? You see, folks, this is what Paul Offit didn't want. What he didn't want was us and you and the world starting to ask the appropriate questions about vaccination. How long are they studied for? How long do they go through safety trials? What was the placebo group? Was there one at all? And you can tell, and by the way, the reason I think Paul Offit has such a problem with this is that every headline is telling us there's 2 groups that Donald Trump really wants to make this available to this fall. That is doctors, our frontline defense, and African Americans. For those of you that are African American, I would say, I would maybe tell you to go and look at the Tuskegee experiment and ask yourself, are they lining up for another Tuskegee using African-American citizens? I don't know. I'd start asking that question, but bring that up again. Let's look at that headline. Bill Gates says healthcare workers may get a coronavirus shot within 18 months. The scientists race to develop a vaccine. Well, obviously they're ramping it up, and Paul Offit doesn't like the idea that he himself is about to become the test subject. All right, and then really quickly, just to talk about another vaccine, back in April of last year, we talked about the MMR trials, there were several trials that we brought up in our show that had a total of 800, I think, and 50 participants in the trial. And between 30 and 40% of the 800 had serious gastrointestinal and upper respiratory illnesses from the vaccine. Just about half of them got sick from the vaccine. There was no placebo group, Paul, and therefore it got approved. Not 20,000, not 10,000 in placebo group, no placebo group, whoop, throw that away, and only 800 people, half of whom got really sick, and that got approved. So, Paul, I guess all I'm asking for is this. Since you seem to be developing a brilliant conscience, and I know that you really do care about people, I have always said that even to your face when I've met you. I think that what you want is for people to be healthy. I hope you will join me in beginning to really sound the alarm, as you just stated, on any vaccine that was not tested on 20,000 individuals with 10,000 in a placebo group with about 2 or 3 years length of time so that we can see if the vaccines caused autoimmune disease. Welcome to the party, Paul. It's great to have you. All right, well, it doesn't end there, folks. I'm not just going to admonish Paul because he might be wrong about some of his stats. I think it's really great that he has stepped forward to call out this vaccine, and we really need to. Okay? This vaccine is super dangerous. I know that it's just a part of the agenda. They're just going to use this vaccine to break down your rights to reject the vaccine. They'll force it on all of us, and then will come the tidal wave of all the other vaccines that they're going to force you into. So this is just being used to fight, for their agenda I mentioned at the top of the show. But this is a legal action in essence we're taking. For those of you just joining us for the first time, you're never going to see a show like The High Wire. We're not only the only ones reporting truth, the only ones showing you science from around the world and telling you what's actually going on. We actually commit ourselves to making a difference with the science that we find. So you can go to thehighwire.com to look at all of the things that we're working on. Please subscribe right now, because obviously when you do work like we're doing, they're going to want to censor us right off of Facebook or YouTube or something else. So please, will you go ahead and sign up on our website so we can always find you no matter where we have to run to write you the letters and bring you the information. But this is a citizen's petition right here to the FDA that just got sent out last night. This is very, very important because it's based on what Paul Offit just said. Now, you can find this on our website at ICanDecide.org, but let me just read you the gist of what we are demanding. And by the way, this is not like anything else we've done. The FDA has a portal with which, if you make the appropriate petition and put your own self at risk, which is what I'm going to describe too, they have to take this into council and look at their rules and see if they are going to make a difference. And what is the difference we're asking for? Here's what we want from all of the coronavirus vaccine trials. Here we go. All right, to begin with, the action requested, number 1, is to hereby request that the commissioner, A, require all phase 2 and 3 trials of vaccines against COVID-19 include a placebo control group. B, the placebo shall be a saline injection without anything added. If the vaccine and saline are visually distinguishable, opaque vials should be used. Don't give us some baloney that you can see the vial, therefore you cannot use saline. C, the placebo control group shall be of at least equivalent size to the experimental group. D, all, and this is huge, all systemic adverse reactions, adverse events, serious adverse events, medically attended adverse events, new onset medical conditions, and any other health issue arising or exacerbated post-vaccination shall be documented for each subject post-vaccination for a period of at least 12 months for adults, 36 months for children and teenagers, and 60 months for infants and toddlers. These are huge points. You cannot say it's safe. And by the way, now I believe Dr. Paul Offit is backing this up, and so is Dr. Peter Hotez. And in this document, we quote Paul Offit saying this is the only way to establish safety, and that's very important. Our petition goes on to read, because there is no licensed COVID-19 vaccine, an active control is not appropriate for trials of new COVID-19 vaccines. Thus, clinical trials of potential COVID-19 vaccines should include a placebo control group. 9, further heightening this need for placebo-controlled studies is the fact that the Secretary of the United States Department of Health and Human Services has already granted those developing and selling any COVID-19 product broad immunity from liability for injuries. So they have no responsibility to us. You had better. And 15, the undersigned therefore respectfully urges that the actions requested above be adopted forthwith. And this is the first time I've ever signed this. The way we have to submit this means I am now under risk of perjury. 17, I certify that to the best of my knowledge and belief, this petition includes all information and views upon which the petition relies. This petition includes representative data and or information known to the petitioner which are unfavorable to the petition. And I have taken reasonable steps to ensure that any representative data and or information which are unfavorable to the petition were disclosed to me. I further certify that the information upon which I have based the action requested herein first became known to the party on whose behalf this petition is submitted on or about the following date, May 28, 2020. I have not received or expect to receive payments, including cash and other forms of consideration, to file this information or its contents. I verify, under penalty of perjury, that the foregoing is true and correct as of the date of the submission of this petition. Sincerely yours, Del Bigtree, Informed Consent Action Network. Well, those of you out there knows what that last paragraph means. That means that Dorit Reese is out there. She is going to pour through this thing. Paul Offit and these people say we may have a way to get to Del. We may have a way to investigate him or get him arrested because now perhaps he's perjured himself. That's how seriously this document we are taking. I'm putting it on the line. And by the way, it is a bit of a chicken match because if they decide to arrest me, guess what I will finally get? That's right, discovery. You guys want to arrest me? Let's really get into the details of these vaccines and how the trials go on. I'm only saying this because this is getting real and we are not playing games any longer. And I need your support. Maybe at some point I will need legal help. But what I want you to know is we are fighting for you. The Informed Consent Action Network, our nonprofit, is standing up for you right now, making sure that no shoddy trial. And by the way, Moderna currently doesn't have a saline placebo. And by the way, the Oxford trial of AstraZeneca's vaccine just got rid of their need for a saline placebo. They just ditched it. So this is going to try and ensure, and we're going to be all over them to make sure that they do proper trials. If you like that clip, then be sure to check out our live broadcast of The High Wire every Thursday morning at 11 a.m. Pacific Time. You can watch it on Facebook, YouTube, iTunes, and Twitter. We'll see you there.